Hello, everybody. It's Mike Yao with Fire in the Head Productions and the Red Sun role-playing game and Savage Kingdoms role-playing game. So today's video is about specifically Red Sun. This banner right here over my left shoulder. This is Savage Kingdoms, my other game that's been around for a while, but we're going to talk about Red Sun today because I've been kind of going back and forth between the two, which is not a bad thing. It's cool having two games, but trying to figure out which one to publish next, it's been quite the chore. So today's video is about the basic rules of Red Sun. So I know I've mentioned it in past videos, but I don't know if I really put it down in a specific video. I know I did a character creation one, which covers some of it. But I just want to kind of let you know how the basic rule system of Red Sun works. It's actually fairly simple. So number one, it's a D8 dice system. It's a D8 dice pool system. Personally, I've never been like a massive fan of dice pools. I know some people aren't either, but there are also a lot of people that really like them. Um, but I thought I would do something different this time because Savage Kingdoms is just everything runs off of a D20. And then obviously D&D and Pathfinder do the D20 is the main die, and then you have the D4s, D6s, D8s, D10s, D12s, D20, etc. And then Red Sun is just all D8. So my little MO as a game designer, my little dabbling game designer, is you've probably noticed the pattern already that I like simplified, streamlined dice systems that doesn't use like tons of different dice. I feel like that slows the game down. It also confuses new players a bit. So SK was D20 only, and Red Sun is D8s only. So D8 dice system. You can roll up to 8 D8s, and I'll tell you how all of that works. So you'll never roll more than 8 uh, 8-sided dice, 8d8. I capped it there. I like to cap things a lot in my rules. Have a lot of robust things that can happen, but I like to put some kind of cap very often on some things, not everything, but you'll kind of see that. All right, so the D8 dice system, you roll a number of dice equal to your trait. So there are 4 traits for characters and creatures and monsters and NPCs. There's agility, strength, mind, and spirit, right? There's only 4. Agility is pretty obvious, right? It's how agile you are, right? How dexterous, how agile, how your hand-eye coordination, your quickness to a degree, your swiftness. Strength is physical strength, right? So that's your power, your muscularity, perhaps even your size to a degree is factored in there. Mind is I guess to use the D&D term, is really is kind of your um, intelligence and kind of your wisdom also. So it's really how your wits are, how clever you are, how much you might know, but also how you can think in the moment, and perhaps even to a degree, also how perceptive you are, which is like in D&D is more like a wisdom thing. So all that's kind of combined into mind. And then the last trait is spirit. Now spirit's kind of like a combination of charisma and willpower. If from D&D, well, I know it's wisdom, but willpower from Savage Kingdoms and say charisma or magnetism from Savage Kingdoms or charisma from Dungeons and Dragons. In other words, the way to look at it is a spirited individual might be how do you enforce your spirit upon another person or being or the world, but also how spirited you are in resisting things as well. So very cool. Yeah, so you make this, for example, say in the adventure, the game master might be, say you want your character, you're like, I want to leap over this 15-foot wide river. That would the GM would most likely say make an agility or strength test. Strength mostly comes to mind, but for jumping and leaping, agility and strength is highly suggested in Red Sun, either or. So you would have that player to say make an agility or strength test, and then that player might have a specialty in it called, they might have the climbing or climber talent, which gives them a +1 die boost in climbing or jumping. Let's say jumping in this case, right? So let's say they have a trait of 2, which is average, but they have a +1 die because they have this. I think it's called athletic, which would give them a boost to jumping and stuff. So they would roll 3 dice in this case, and they're looking for a target number to succeed against, and that would be anywhere from 4 to 8 usually. Technically, it can be anywhere from 1 to 8. It can never be more than 8. You'll see why in a second. You probably already figured it out. It's the 8 system, and you're looking for a number of successes. Now, in most cases, almost all cases, all you need is a single success, known as a marginal success. And the reason it's called a marginal success is that it is a success, but the GM is free to flavor like a tiny little drawback, but mostly it kind of gets ignored for the most part. In fact, it's suggested to, for the most part, hand wave it, but maybe a small, minor little thing happen. And normally it's in the description instead of like a hard-coded game mechanic. For example, you slip down the tree slightly, some of the bark of the tree comes off, but you still manage to grab a hold of the limb that you were going for. Or you strike your opponent with your spear and it jars your hand really bad, but you still scored the one success, which typically is 1 point of damage, which I'll get to momentarily. So yeah, so that's a marginal success, which is only 1, but that's usually all you need. 2 degrees of success, we call it a moderate success. That means that's just a straight old success. Nothing bad happens at all, but nothing really special happens at all. 3 successes is called an extraordinary success, and particularly in spellcasting, that's the first degree of success where something special happens beyond the basic spell description, which again I'll get to shortly. As far as other skills go, the GM is it's up to him or her to add maybe an extra little benefit to an extraordinary success, or if you might want to let a player flavor something. But for the most part, it's not that big a deal because the next degree of success, the fourth degree of success, is a heroic success. Heroic success is kind of like it sounds, is kind of heroic. It's pretty unusual because that's 4 successes. It's pretty hard to get unless you're really, really good at something and the difficulty rating is like low, like 4 or something, or even 3. Because that's how many dice. So if you're rolling like 5 dice, and in this case it's a difficulty rating of 4, odds are you're going to get 2 to 3 successes in general. But you could get 4, and that would be heroic in this case. A heroic success, if it's in combat, there's actually a chart for heroic successes and legendary successes that you get to roll on. So not only does the heroic success does 4 points of damage in combat, which I'll get to again later, but apparently I'm already getting to it. Up to the maximum damage of the weapon. And then in addition, you roll it on the heroic success chart, and you could like knock the opponent's helmet off, or smash his teeth in, or gouge his eye, or break his shield, disarm him, knock him prone, etc. So all these really cool dynamic things can really happen. The Red Sun combat system actually moves is extremely fast. It's been so fast that I've actually had time left over when I've run this at DragonCon and other conventions, whereas Savage Kingdoms runs pretty fast, but still not as fast. D&D, as we know, can run fast if everybody's in on it. Like there's the players are ready to go with their turns, but otherwise, as you know, D&D can, especially at higher levels, can be a bit of a slog. So yeah, if it's a legendary success, that's 5 successes. That's the maximum, by the way. It doesn't go above legendary, so 5 successes is a complete maximum, even if you are rolling 7 dice in one case and have 6 successes for some reason, which is possible. It's still a legendary or 5 successes. And that would be, again, in combat, that would be 5 points of damage if you got a weapon capable of that. And that's only like great axes and mauls, big, heavy 2-handed weapons. Or steel weapons that are like master crafted. For example, a mastercrafted steel broadsword can actually do up to 5, but normally it's 4 for a regular broadsword, which typically are bronze or just iron without the steel element. So yeah, you would roll in a different chart if this were combat for legendary success, and even more incredible things can happen than heroic. Like you can put someone, you can cause a bleeding wound, you can cause the person to be stunned, lose an eye, have the blindness condition, lose an ear, have the deafened condition permanently. Stuff like you can knock someone not only prone but back a yard or 2, which might knock them over a cliff or into a river or something, which can be really cool and fun and dynamic. If this were spellcasting, there is for heroic success, in every case, all the spells do something special than the basic spell description, which is really cool. The DR to resist might be boosted by 1 or 2. It might do extra damage. It might do another effect, like the person's poisoned as well as shaken or diseased. Just a bunch of examples. And then on spellcasting, legendary success has its own entry too. And as you can imagine, that can be some really nasty stuff. It might be that the DR to resist the spell is boosted by 2, and there's another effect or 2. In fact, these are very often the case. So very cool. All right, so now we're going to talk about the 4 traits. I think I just did, actually. Agility, strength, mind, and spirit. Right. Those are your 4 basic traits. Now, I know, right, I wrote it down again. to cue me in my thought of mentioning derived statistics or derived stats. Now, these are things like vigor, stamina, defense, mobility, and that's the only four I wrote down, but I feel like there's another one or two. I'll think of it in a second, hopefully. They are derived from those four traits, kind of like in Savage Kingdoms. I'm really into games that are really connected. Like you have a statistics that's based on the six or four primary ones attributes, or in this case we're calling them traits in Red Sun. I might switch it back to attributes like in Savage Kingdoms, but I'm pretty happy with traits just for something different. So your vigor is your strength plus your spirit. Vigor is, if you're used to Savage Kingdoms, that's one of the six ability score or attributes, kind of like Constitution. D&D. It's how vigorous you are, right? How healthy and like how fast you kind of heal, how much energy maybe you have. Um, but in this case, we're using the term vigor for health. And again, I might switch it back to health, but I'm really kind of dig vigor. I don't know. It's just it sounds very very sword and sorcery, which is what Red Sun is. Very classic pulp sword and sorcery. Um, there's vigor, so that's yeah, strength plus your spirit. And the reason why strength is kind of like obviously bigger, stronger people typically take a little bit more damage, like physical hardship. Not always the case, but generally speaking. And then it adds spirit, which, like I said earlier, spirit is part of spirit is your willpower, and so this is your will. Somebody that's very willful and stubborn might take an injury, but just out of sheer stubbornness, they might be able to push on. So that's why those two traits combine to produce your vigor. And you only start with an average of like 4 or 5 usually. So it sounds like a low amount, and it kind of is, but weapons you're really taking like on like 2 points of damage, 1 point of damage on some shots, maybe 3 or 4, like I mentioned. But again, this is hardcore pulp sword and sorcery. So if you get hit with a heroic success from a great axe, then you probably would be dead, or at least unconscious, or maybe just one vigor left. Stamina is your mind plus spirit. Well, actually, it's 6 plus mind plus spirit. So that is an average of 10 to start with, but with player characters it might be 11, possibly even slightly higher if you take a certain talent. Same with vigor, by the way. There's a talent called vigorous, which gives you a +1 to your vigor. Um, yeah, so stamina is kind of like in Savage Kingdoms. It governs spellcasting, sorcery, as it's more termed in this type of setting. But also mundane things like like traveling on past 10 hours of travel, or sprinting, or certain combat maneuvers cost stamina, things like that. So it powers spellcasting, combat maneuvers, a few social maneuvers, maybe even a few racial abilities, but also mundane kind of things too. And then defense. Defense is 3 plus your agility. So the average agility is 2, so 3 plus 2 is 5. That's like your average defense. Some PC player characters may start with if they have an agility of 3, they would start with a 6, which is nice. If you have a shield, it boosts your defense by 1, so you can start with as high as a 7 actually. And you can get to 8 fairly quickly with certain talents. There's one called Hard Parry, which you use your strength instead of your agility for your defense, as long as you were armed or have a shield. And it means that you are primarily parrying, blocking things instead of dodging them. So it's worked out really well actually. And so yeah, if you have an agility of 1, that's only a 4 defense. So you're getting hit somewhat often. So you have to be careful. So, speaking of which, I'll talk about armor here in a second, so I don't get out of order. And then you have mobility. Mobility is the same term I use in Savage Kingdoms. It's your speed or your movement. I just prefer to use mobility because it's kind of like a new, like I haven't seen the other games use it. I'm sure there are some that do. That is 3 plus your agility plus your strength. So if 2 and 2 is average, 3, so that's a 7 mobility on average. But or no, wait, 6. I think it's, yeah, 2 plus 2. I don't know. I think it's 6. But some PCs could somewhat easily start with this with 7 and possibly even an 8 if they have like agility 3 and strength 3, which is possible to start with that. Those are both considered extraordinary traits. Right. Mobility, and then we have, all right, so this is point number 7, combat, which I brushed on a little bit, right? Number of successes equals damage, which I kind of touched on a few moments ago. So to clarify that, So, for example, let's say you're attacking an opponent with a defense of 6, and you're attacking with a dagger. Daggers run off of agility or strength. Let's say your character has a 3 agility. You're like, I'm gonna be more finesse with the dagger. I'm gonna use agility. And you have the dagger adept talent, which gives you +1. Now, +1 in this system always means +1 die. It never means you add a number after the roll. It always means +1 die. The math, this is all on purpose. This system was designed to not have a lot of addition. In fact, there's hardly any except for with initiative, which I'll get to at some point. Actually, I don't have it written down, so hopefully I remember it. But anyway, back to combat. So, for example, what was the example I was setting up? Agility. So you have that would be 4 dice and daggers. Agility 3 +1 for having the dagger adept talent. And there's even like a dagger expert and even dagger master, which gives you 2 and 3 extra dice. So if you ever made it to dagger master, you could be rolling 6 dice to attack with a dagger. But we'll say keep it simple and more like early levels or advancements of the game. You might just be rolling 2, 3, maybe 4 dice. So we'll say, like I said, he's rolling 4, and you roll. Here, actually, you know what? I'm going to roll actually 4 dice and do a real example here. So I rolled an 8, 7, 2, and a 3, right? So the defense of the opponent, I think I said was 6. So we're just looking for how many successes against a difficulty rating of 6, or what we call a DR. 2 successes, the 8 and a 7. So that would be 2 points of damage, which a dagger can do. That's the maximum damage of a dagger. So that would score 2 points of damage against that opponent that had a defense of 3. Now, in this case, if the opponent had a defense of 7, it still would have been 2 successes because I rolled a 7, 8, a 4, and a 3. If the opponent had a defense of 8, which is pretty tough, that would still have been 1 success, so 1 point of damage. However, there's a way to mitigate damage. There's 2 ways, actually, which I'll get to in just a second, but I don't want to get out of order. So combat has a heroic and legendary table, which I mentioned earlier. Oh, mishaps, right. I should have mentioned this earlier. So the D8 dice system of Red Sun has a degrees of success, like we talked about, right? So marginal, moderate, extraordinary, heroic, and legendary. The flip side of that is a mishap. So if you make a roll, for example, the example we just used, 4d8, right? An agility test with a +1 boost for dagger adept. If 3 of those dice out of the 4 were 1s, that would be a mishap. So the rule is if more than half of the dice are 1s, that is considered a mishap or a critical failure that some systems might call it. In fact, Savage Kingdoms calls it that. But in this system, it is called a mishap. And that means some cool but bad stuff can happen to your character. But I say cool because it's kind of fun storytelling wise, right? There's really technically no way to fail in a tabletop role playing in a story based role playing game. So if it were combat, you would roll in the mishap table, and you could break a weapon. You could have your weapon knocked out of your hands. You could slip prone. Your helmet can go over your eyes, and it takes 2 actions to adjust it. Otherwise, you have the partial blindness condition. Cool, and stuff like that. Bowstrings can break, stuff like that. I think the worst of them is that you strike an ally in combat, but it's like the maximum damage is only like 2 in this case. Because I think it's ridiculous. I think that in real battle, if you were to, you're probably not going to swing full. Like by the time you realize you're about to strike an opponent, I feel like you would pull your blow. Maybe not in some cases, but anyway, it can happen. So yeah, they can be fun, but obviously kind of nasty. Hence the term mishap. In spellcasting, mishaps can happen too, right? Anytime you're making a skill test or a trait test, rolling these dice, you can possibly get mishaps or heroic or legendary successes. Spellcasting is no different. So if you mishap for sorcery, for spells, each spell description has all the regular spell entry stats, which are a lot. They've been pretty condensed for Red Sun. It's a pretty quick spell description block. But there's a listing for extraordinary success, which usually means you save a stamina point in most spells. There's a few other spells that do something else. Heroic success does some pretty cool stuff, like I mentioned, legendary, even cooler stuff. And then there's the mishap entry. And that could be, because it is sorcery, and it's supposed to be, it is a sword and sorcery game. Magic or sorcery is pretty nasty. Like, it's not whimsical. There aren't cantrips. People in this setting would take it pretty seriously, right? So meaning that a mishap can be some pretty serious stuff. You can do a point of damage to yourself with armor not even helping. I think it's some of the higher master level and cosmic sorcery, which I'll explain at some point in a video. You could possibly up to 2 points of damage to yourself, which, like I said, that's doesn't sound like a lot if you're used to like D&D. That's it's a lot. Look at a point of damage as almost like a degree of damage or a wound. In fact, I thought about calling it that. I do have a chart though that lists if the GMs want to be more flavorful instead of just always saying 1 point of damage or two. There's names for the types of damage. Like a point of damage is a light wound, for example. 2 points of damage is a moderate wound. 3 points of damage is a heavy wound, I think is what I call it. 4 is grievous. 5 is severe, I think, and then 6 is mortal. Because the mortal, that's actually most PCs that is a mortal wound. Although I have seen a player actually get up to 8 vigor once, which is impressive. He had a high strength and spirit, and then took the vigorous talent. I think it was maybe it was 7, but I think it was 8 actually. So that yeah. So a 6 point mortal wound isn't really mortal to the character unless he was injured before, of course. Anyway, mishap tables. Oh yeah, armor rolls. Since I'm still kind of talking about combat, I was talking about mitigating damage. So let's say if you do get hit with that theory I talked about earlier, you get stabbed with this dagger for 2 points of damage, but you have, we'll say you have brigandine armor, which brigandine in Savage Kingdoms and in Red Sun is kind of a compository term. It's a composite term, meaning that it really is any kind of leather enhanced with uh, metal or bone, other pieces, which is kind of technically what the original meaning of brigandine meant, that brigands, like, it was piecemeal armor that brigands like stole and took off of people. That's where the term comes from. It then became later to be known as like a certain type of the cloth armor with the plates in it. But generally speaking, it really kind of means any kind of enhanced leather, usually hard leather, but it can be soft leather and furs and stuff too. So brigandine, let's say you're wearing that, which in this setting would typically be like leather with metal or bronze rings or plates kind of sewn onto it haphazardly in most cases. And that is, if I recall, 3 points of armor. It might be 4. Um, we'll say it's 4, and then just for the sake of example. So you would then roll a d8, and this is the only time you want to roll low. I just rolled a 1 actually, so that means it actually hit the armor. The armor absorbs 1 point. So in that example where you got stabbed for 2 points of damage, you would have only taken 1 point of damage because the brigandine armor slowed the blow down. You still took a light wound, right? 1, meaning that it must have got through it, or maybe it skimmed off of it, clipped you across the chin or something, however you want to describe it. But game mechanically, that's what happened. You still took 1 point of damage. Now, if you were only hit for 1 point of damage, and I made that armor roll, which I just did, that would be 0 damage, right? So you can totally soak damage. So yeah, that's called an armor roll. It's the only time in the game system you want to roll low because you want to roll below the armor rating. In this case, brigandine was 4. Another example is chainmail. I think is chain shirt. I think is also 4. Maybe brigandine was 3. Anyway, a full hauberk or suit, but a hauberk of chainmail I think is 5 or 6. Scale is 6. There is no plate armor per se, not in like the high medieval sense of the word. There is kind of like there's the bronze breastplates that still exist that the Rhodonians would be wearing, and a few other cultures kind of wear that type of armor. Um, that can give you like 7 or 8 points of damage. So you might be wondering, like, what if I have 8 points of damage? And it's a D8. I'm like, well, you probably already figured that out. What that means, you don't have to make the armor roll at all. It automatically soaks, right? It automatically absorbs. If you had 7 points of armor, you would still have to roll, but 1 through 7, you block a point of damage, and 8 is be the rare time you're hit in an unarmored area. And so that's what storytelling wise, narratively speaking, is happening. If you fail the armor roll, it means you were hit in an unarmored area because this is more of a classic setting, bronze to Iron Age, and even in late medieval, you see it in the media all the time. It's generally very wrong. Very few people are wearing their full coverage of armor. It's just way too heavy, way too expensive, not very practical. Um, Very heavy, very hot, and so there are always gaps in the armor or literally exposed flesh. In the case of some of the cultures that might be more warmer, right, where you just don't want to, you just can't wear as much armor, or maybe metal poor countries or kingdoms or realms. So there's a lot of exposed flesh. And so that's what that represents with the die roll. Now you can, while I'm on the subject, you can get up to above 8, which is interesting. Say if you have a superior suit of scale armor, metal scale, I think that's 7 points, and a war helm. Wait, that might have been 8. Okay, actually, a mastercrafted suit of scale armor is 8 points. I'm pretty sure, 91% sure. And then say you have a war helm. A war helm is actually 1 point of armor. It has a protection rating of 1. So that is a 9, right? But actually, the way we write it in Red Sun is an 8/1, meaning that 8 is automatic. You block 1 point of armor /1. If you roll a 1 on the d8, it blocks 2 points of armor. So that carryover number means there's a chance of blocking or absorbing or soaking 2 points of damage, which, as you probably figured out by now in this system, is pretty good. That's a lot of damage. That's like 10 or 12 points of damage in Savage Kingdoms. D&D is a little wonkier because it scales, but it might be 15 points of damage. Well, lower levels is probably lower, maybe 20. I don't know. So yeah, that's how all that works. Armor rolls is what it's technically called. Well, it's not really technical at all. I think it's called something else. But all right, spellcasting and sorcery, which I basically already went over. I'm talking about the extraordinary and legendary successes and heroic successes. So there are a chart, like I mentioned, for each spell description. There are mishaps as well, like I mentioned. I'm just mentioning it again because I have it in my little outline here. Number 14, appropriate. Oh yeah, appropriate mage talent. So I know this video is mostly just about the game mechanics, about the dice mechanics, the action resolution system, but I thought I would mention, so we talked about spellcasting and sorcery, that you have to have the appropriate mage talent, kind of like in Savage Kingdoms, to be able to work sorcery or cast sorcery. There are 7 disciplines of magic or sorcery, like there is in Savage Kingdoms. Again, it's the same setting, actually. So you'll see a lot of, that's another reason I carry a lot of the terms and a lot of the lore carries over, but not all of it does because Red Sun is set 2,500 years before the Savage Kingdom's default timeline, which is more in the Dark Ages. It's well into the Iron Age at that point, and then almost every culture knows how to make the secret of steel as well, or the riddle of steel, the enigma of steel, as it's called in the system. So, but yeah, it's bronze weapons are still kind of the norm. You're doing good if you get an iron weapon, and if you know how the secret of steel, that's even better. It's just tempered iron, right? Flexible, lighter, stronger. You know how steel is. And so, yeah, so there's 7 disciplines of sorcery: air, earth, fire, water, shadow, life, and death, just like in Savage Kingdoms. And in order to learn a mage talent, what's really cool if you're really into classic pulp, particularly pulp sword sorcery fiction, which I am. Conan, obviously, the Conan stories are probably the hallmark of all of those. But there's also Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. There's Michael Moorcock's Elric of Melniboné, a bunch of others, but those are kind of like the 3 that probably influenced me the most. Those have in their worlds, like when you learn sorcery, and it's almost always NPCs that learn it. There's occasionally there'll be like a protagonistic NPC or a main protagonist in some sword sorcery stories that has dabbled in sorcery too. But in all these cases, sorcery is like I mentioned earlier in the video, it's a very serious, weighty thing. And in order to learn sorcery, there's usually several options. And you have to reflect this by taking a complication automatically. So whenever you learn a mage talent, let's say you learn the air mage initiate talent, you would have to learn that first. You would only know a couple of initiate level spells within the air discipline. Then you have to choose one of, I think it's like 5 different complications to represent how you learned that sorcery instead of just one day I decided to learn it. You you have to choose whether it's a supernatural, like it was a supernatural pact with some demonic, or even maybe if you're lucky celestial creature, or madness is an option in some of the disciplines as well, because they're not necessarily have all the same choices of complications. Because sorcery can drive you mad as well. A lot of sorcerers and a lot of these sword sorcery stories, you can tell, are pretty mad. They've been exposed to the cosmos and the truth, and it's kind of made them a little bit mad. Or write out corrupted, particularly in death magic. Corrupted is really the only way of like kind of being evil in the setting, because in sword and sorcery, like in the Conan world, morality and Savage Kingdoms too, the morality is very gray. It's a very gray morality, or what I call tribal morality, where within your own people and tribe, you're pretty cool with each other, but kind of beyond that, you get a little suspicious because it's kind of a harsh world. So, and maybe you don't quite apply your same morality or laws to them. So that's kind of why I call it tribal morality. But I think most people would probably call it kind of a gray morality. But it doesn't mean that there aren't points of light and many points of darkness. And so there is kind of a way to be evil, and that is to be corrupted. And that means that you've done some really, really horrible things, probably over and over, or you made deals with demons or both. Um, like just killing some people for, well, I wouldn't say for no reason, but for like iffy reasons, that's just kind of a normal thing in the setting. So uh, you wouldn't get tainted from that. But if you were to like sacrifice an entire village of 1,000 people to some horrible dark god, you're probably going to get tainted or corrupted. It's called tainted in Savage Kingdoms, but I think I've called it corrupted in Red Sun. I might go back to tainted. I don't know. Anyway, that's the idea. Or you might get Oathbreaker or something like that, or what's some other cool ones? Phobias. You could definitely choose a phobia of. Let's use the air magic example I was using, right? Maybe your phobia of air or your phobia of lightning, more specifically, or thunder, has fueled your fascination with learning air magic. Uh, or you're obsessed. The one that works probably better than that is obsession. You have to choose obsession thunderstorms for air. If it were water magic, you might be obsessed with the sea or deep water. If it were death magic, you might be obsessed with death. And or shadow magic, you're obsessed with see, shadow is mind and divination, stuff like that. Um, yeah, any number of things. Earth could be obsessed with gems and gold, or with underground regions, or something like that. So, anyway, my point is, all these complications, you have to choose at least one when you take a mage talent to explain how you learned it. Right. Advancement in the core rules of Red Sun. So spending experience points is what I wrote down. Oh yeah. All right. So advancement experience point system is just like Savage Kingdoms. You earn 1 XP or experience point per hour of play. I like this system. That's why I'm using it for Red Sun as well. For every hour of gameplay, say you sit down for a 4-hour session, you earn 4 experience points. The reason I like this is it's nice and simple. Obviously with low numbers, but also it doesn't overly reward combat, even though it is a sword and sorcery setting. It would, I guess, call kind of almost work. But it doesn't also over reward social. Like it doesn't overly reward anything that happens in the game, right? So it's almost a meta thing. I mean, it does mean your character is really learning and experiencing more things, so that does kind of work. But it's also kind of meta in a way, because we're going on how many hours the player is playing, and not the character. The character might, in a 4-hour session, you might have passed a couple of months, right? Depending on how far you're traveling or what you're doing. Maybe you're taking some downtime or something. So anyway, over in SK, there's a chart, right? It goes advancement 1 is 10, and then the next advancement is 22, the next is 36. This is an SK 40, by the way. 52, then 70, and then 90, etc. This one is every. In fact, I'm about to change it. Right now, it suggests that every 10 to 15 experience points, the GM should then allow the PCs to take some downtime. And during that downtime of a week or 2 or 3, that is where they learn these new talents from. I'm now looking at possibly, it may be at least an optional rule, to allow players to literally spend their experience points after every session if they want, which is kind of cool. Say you did a 5-hour session, you got 5 XP. Oh, by the way, you could earn a bonus point like an SK. The table gets together at the end. Everybody does a secret vote of who was the best role player, or like the most dynamic player for the night, and that person gains a bonus experience point. So in a 4-hour session, you might get 5 XP if you were the player of the night, and you could immediately spend those 5 experience points if you want. Now I would probably put caveats. So there are certain talents that I feel like you wouldn't just immediately learn. Now most of them are flavored to where it's assumed that perhaps you have been learning these things, right, in the background. You just haven't really used them yet because you don't really have them game mechanically, right? And that's why they don't come up in the narrative. So, for example, if you were, let's use our dagger adept talent. Let's say you, I think you need 4 experience or 8 experience points to become a dagger, the next level of that dagger expert. And let's say you earn 4 experience points in one session, and you earn 5 the next one. You got 9 experience points, and you're like, oh, I think I want to be better at the dagger, so I'm gonna spend 8 points for dagger adept or dagger expert, and you would have 1 XP left over. And so that's easy to learn, but you're like that could easily just be like, well, obviously you've been getting better with the dagger, you've been using it, and then now you're even better, +1 die, right? So I think all that stuff is easy to explain, but there's a few other things like learning a new mage talent, a new sorcery. Like for example, I was talking about you're an air mage, and maybe you're like, oh, I got 10 points to spend. It's 10 points for another mage, another type of mage talent. Like I want to be a fire mage, and that is fire mage is 10 points. So you're like, cool, I'll spend 10 points. But that one probably should take a few weeks, right? In the very least, to kind of learn. Now, it could be flavor that you have been secretly learning fire, the secrets of fire magic during your travels. Then it's easier to explain that, like, yeah, you spend the 10 points, you're now a fire mage, and you now know these couple spells or whatever. But I'm looking at possibly making any talent that costs double digits, that's 10 or more, actually costs that many days and downtime to learn. So that might be a cool little caveats, a little balancing sort of thing. So like, yes, you can spend these points after each session, which is cool and awesome. I think it would be exciting. But remember, if it's something really expensive, you have to spend some downtime to kind of explain how you're learning these crazy things. Right. All right. So also every 50 points of experience points. So basically on the character sheet, you need to track like XP, or it says earned XP. And then I don't have it on the current character sheet. I might put one where it says spent XP. It's kind of already, well, it's kind of already on there. Is that each talent point has the cost, so you literally can add up like how many. There's also a little area for unspent talent points, because a lot of people do bank them based on what I just said. It might be like, oh, I really want this talent, but it's 20 points, so I'm just gonna save up 20 points. Although it's very tempting because you're like, oh man, this thing is only 5, and I haven't really done anything to change my character in a while. Maybe I'll spend the 5, and I got 15 left over. But yeah, so anyway, and the earned XP area, that is where you track all the experience points you earn. So every 50 XP that you earn, you gain +1 to a trait, right? Which is agility, strength, mind, and spirit. And you can add +1 to that, which is pretty major. That's like in a D&D or Savage Kingdoms attribute or ability score. That's basically like going up 2, possibly 3 in ability score. Because the D8 in this dice system, as far as I can figure out mathematically, is equal to like a plus 2.5 to a D20 roll. So as you can see, that's like pretty major. And then you also gain +1 to your renown every 50 experience points. And your renown starts at 0. After 50 XP, it's now 1. The only way you can start with higher is highborn as a noble, so you could start with renown of 1. So renown's important because if people have heard of you, you might get a bonus, like for being a badass. But also, if you were part of a cult or a priestly sect or an elite society or secret society, um, that's how you're ranked. Like, so at Renown 2, you become like the next rank within that order, which is kind of cool. They usually top out at like Renown 3, although a few of them I think go up to 4 for like Grandmaster or whatever the order is. All right, almost done here, y'all. Spending experience points, I think I just mentioned about. I'm probably going to add that optional rule where you can spend after the session instead of saving. It also puts less pressure on the GM to be like, oh man, I have to like give him downtime, even though this is a really weird time for it. Speaking of downtime, that's in the rules, very similar to Savage Kingdoms, where it goes in weeks. But I'm looking at possibly changing it to days. I don't know, and maybe every 10 days of downtime, you get to take a downtime action. And that's like a major kind of thing you're doing, like you're crafting an item, or you're searching for a rare item, a smuggled item, or you're hiring someone to assassinate someone, or you're going to assassinate someone yourself, or you're hiring someone to steal something, or stealing something yourself, or you're doing some training, you're doing some sacrifices, faith based thing. There's a whole list of them. The last thing I'll talk about is equipment. Again, it's not really in the basic dice system, but I just kind of threw it on here. So equipment, you start with your character starts with your race gives you several, and you have options. You have a menu that you can spin for equipment, which I think is really exciting. And then your calling gives you even more. So basically, your race gives you a few things, your culture, and then your calling, which kind of makes sense, gives you the most equipment, which kind of makes sense because that's your like your profession basically. And a lot of equipment, well, particularly armor is bronze for the most part. There'll be some iron or an iron boss on a shield or something. Shields are mostly wood. You wouldn't waste a lot of maybe bronze. You wouldn't waste iron like on a full shield for the most part. If you're lucky, if you could probably start with an iron weapon or two, depending on your culture. Starting with a steel weapon is really hard. I think you literally have to be a noble is the only way you can start with like a full steel weapon. And then equipment comes in Savage Kingdoms. We have exceptional quality, mastercrafted, um, heroic quality, and legendary. In Red Sun we have well average and poor also. Red Sun we have poor, average, superior, and because I'm using the term exceptional for something else. Superior quality. Next is mastercrafted, or I think I'm just calling it mastercraft in this system. And then there's heroic and legendary. So pretty much similar to Savage Kingdoms, but they have different stats because it's a slightly different game system and the numbers are lower and that kind of stuff. But there you go. I think that's going to be it. I didn't think the video was going to go 40 minutes, but I was hoping more like 30 to 35. But hopefully you made it to the end and you understand a little bit more how the basic rules of Red Sun go and that sort of thing. The D8 dice systems I find quite fun actually for the most part, at least for dice pools. Very simple. Oh yeah, actually, let me finish one last thing because I teased it earlier. I said that there was only one time you add dice together. So I already covered the one time where you want to roll low, and then the one time you add dice together is the only time. And I might change it, but I don't think so. That is initiative. Initiative is an agility or willpower roll, not a test, because a test means you can crit. You have to add up levels of success, degrees of success. So you roll, say if you have an agility of 3, like we mentioned earlier, and in a spirit of 2, you would obviously probably choose agility, and you roll 3d6 or 3d8. Sorry, roll 3d8, and you add all that up. So you got a 13, and that's the order you go in the initiative tracker. High roll, work all the way down to the low. And then there's something in combat, which initiatives usually used for combat, but I also use it for action scenes as well, which combat is an action scene. If you no, I forgot what I was going to say. So if you roll, oh yeah, it's called Ties of Battle. So the GM, after rolling initiative at the beginning of like a battle or an action scene, he secretly rolls, he or she secretly rolls I just roll a 3, a D8, and that's when you re-roll initiatives after 3 rounds. But you don't tell the player characters that. So it keeps the combat a little more dynamic and a little less like, oh, he's next, so I'll do the thing. Where in a real battle, like you would really have no way of knowing that. So that's it. Initiative does it that way, and then the armor roll is low. All the other rolls you always want to roll high, and you're trying to hit a difficulty rating, a DR number. So anyway, thanks for paying attention. Talk to you guys again soon.